Good morning. Can you hear me? Can you hear me through your phones? Because we are going to have French speaking and English speaking here, so we can understand each other. You have to scan the QR code with your phone, like that you can have the interpretation. Very well then. I think it's a good time to start. We are going to start, so we don't exceed our time. I'm going to introduce myself. I am Sanago Alimajan. I am engaged in the sexual and reproductive health affairs and also those of FP at the level of my country, which is Côte d'Ivoire. I am responsible for the moderation of the session, which is named Young People at the Head of Table, Youth Leadership and Engagement in FAP Programming. We're going to have the intervention of the English and French-speaking youth. Okay. This is our agenda. We're going to start with Mr. Edson that I'm going to introduce. Mr. Edson, he's a singer and composer known through the pseudonym Ali Tasseville as Alitson Jetsa. That's actually his pseudonym. He comes from Togo, and Edson has been working on the promotion of the young adolescents' rights in the questions of family planning and sexual and reproductive health. He is a technical consultant responsible for Messim Oiro of West Africa, Breath for Action in Togo. Without us, the young leaders at the multimedia campaign under SF of Young. That's the title of his presentation. Edson will have 15 minutes to present his summary, and then we're going to give the floor to the next panelist. And once the presentations are over, we're going to move to the Q&A session, as well as we will open to your comments and questions the session. So we are going to start now with Edson's presentation. Edson, the floor is yours. So I will ask you just to to be careful with the time. Thank you for this presentation, which is very faithful to who I am. I am very proud to be presenting today how leadership of youth is applied in an initiative youth apply to and the implementation of a campaign called Merci Mon Héros, Thank You My Hero. And this campaign that is being implemented by us, so the youth, wouldn't be possible for us without us. And I would like to remind us that everywhere in the world, and especially in the low or medium income countries, some conservative mindsets prevent conversations about sex, puberty, family planning. And this taboo has usually an impact on the people, on the youth, before marriage or even before they have their first child. Merci Mon Héros, this multimedia campaign, sustained by the BRITOF Breakthrough for Action project, and financed by EUSAID, gives a response to all of this. Merci Monroe looks to reduce the social impact on youth and access to information for the youth at the service of family planning. This campaign is going to break down taboos by sharing testimonials of young who speak about their experience in matters of SFPF, those of adults that overcome the taboos to help the youth to have access to the information onto the SRPF services. Launched in December 2019. Right now, it is present in 5 countries: Cote d'Ivoire, Niger, Togo, Burkina Faso, and recently in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And here we have youth and young regional consultants. The young testimonials are recorded in video, and I would like to invite you to have this video that I have recorded in Togo and to um, see it with me. This is about a young girl, and she's the one who's going to be sharing her experience when she was when she got pregnant at a very early age. She had the chance, the opportunity to have a hero or a heroine in her life that guided her so she could adopt a contraceptive method because she was already sexually active, and she was able to do this and continue her studies. This is a testimonial translated into French because she's speaking in her mother tongue, so you will have to read a little bit. And here we have the video. Can we have the sound, please? Essa is my young sister. We are neighbors, and I call her my big sister. The way in which she opened up to me, well, I told me that I could trust her, and she helped me. She guided me. When I was 18 years old, I was living with my parents. And after the birth of my son, well, but guys that were approaching me, well, I found it difficult. So she was there to guide me. So we know how to guide people at the hospital. I was afraid because she could go and tell my mother, but she kept my secret. Before she accepted to open up to me, I talked to her about my personal experiences. So she could understand that I had already gone through the same thing. Why is she your heroine? Claire is here. She's my heroine because she made me discover the many things through which I had gone through, and she allowed me to continue my studies. I would like to encourage parents to support the youth, that it is their own kid or not. With the youth, I think we have the possibility to adopt a family planning method so we protect from undesired pregnancies. We have to break down taboos. We have to speak about reproduction, health, family planning with the youth. Be the heroes today. Well, today, as the video was saying, can we go back to the presentation, please? Well, the key message here which is the adult in the video. Well, she says that we do not need to be direct parents of the youth before starting guiding them and supporting them to choose contraceptive method and also to inform them in terms of reproduction matters. And she was saying that all the youth that well, they have that who have had the opportunity to adopt family planning methods have been able to continue their projects, their life projects, either studies, either learning, or the realization of our functions. This video and many other contents are streamed through on different platforms with different targets. We have the streaming of this video and the contents online for young from 18 to 34 on TV and radio. Well, we are streaming this video as well in audio, and we are targeting the youth and the adults, and we organize as well community activities of conversation that we have launched in communities, especially the launching of the campaign that is replaced today by small talk between the youth and the adults in the communities. Among all of these, we make sure that there is some complementarity, and we feel that on social media we are posting missions that are going to be streamed, that are going to be broadcasted on TV and radio in the community, and vice versa. Also, during TV broadcasting in the community, we are going to be sending as well, we're referring people to onto the pages of social media, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook of Merci Monero, so they can interact and continue conversations with regards to projects and the posts that we're conducting on the subjects that are programmed for every month. So, young consultants are exercising their leadership thanks to a collaborative approach between, well, with the adults. And in this sense, this collaborative approach allows the adults to support the youth. This, the adults have the Wayaba project, which is also present, whose headquarters are in the United States. Well, they're going to be supporting the youth through meetings organized every week, through weekly meetings via WhatsApp and Google Workspace, and also MMH. And in here we're going to be discussing problems and new ideas. This collaborative approach has allowed the consultant to accommodate so they can increase their effectiveness. And what they do actually is, well, to identify the youth and the adults in the stories, and they are at the core of the campaign. And they are going to be recording stories in video like the one I have just showed you. We have the communication plan for its publishing on social media platform. We are going to have graph content, radio and TV broadcasting. We're going to work with external partnerships. So consultants have established as well partnerships with 79 organizations and community networks having the goals for the youth in the countries so they can conduct their own conversations so we can bring the relevant role of leadership to a local level. Merci Monero project, because of its collaborative approach, is going to support youth as concept makers and of co-creation with the youth in FP, and even if they are learning together evermore every day. There are even principles that have made this approach possible. This is about remuneration of young workers and the expertise that they contribute with, and that concerns and the knowledge of um, a leisure advertisement, the actors, and also for uh, uh, active advocacy. It is about the capacity of young professionals to increase their effectiveness and their skills in the new fields, especially with regards to the social changement principles and behavioral changement. All this work is being financed by donors, and this is about the co-creation together with the youth, so we can always be faced to reality, and so we can increase their. And so I would like to encourage them to support technically um, the support of youth. So this is virtual between the team members and the local associations. That's how the youth had the opportunity to hold co-creation workshops with adults so they can well guide the campaign. Thanks to this collaborative approach and young leadership consultants on Twitter, we have 700 followers, um, over 1,000 on Instagram, and about 38,000 followers on Facebook. At the community level on social media as well, we have conducted surveys that showed that radio and TV are channels that have allowed for the campaign to reach the public more than through other channels. At the community level, um, we have also introduced a pathway tool, Pathway, which allow the youth and the adults to have conversations. In here we have cards with which we're going to be playing, of course, but that have subjects, themes that allow the youth to and the adults to be able to discuss and to be able to answer some questions, placing them or making them do something that they are not used to do together. That's speaking about reproductive health issues, and this has allowed as well for women and men to agree on the youth using contraceptive methods. Men want to use now the youth to have access to contraceptive methods of family planning. And who is your hero? If we make a flashback, we're going to remember someone who could have shared with you experiences and about reproductive health. And this has allowed us to prevent everything that is linked to the problems that the youth are being faced with. I'm going to, I want to thank especially those who have helped me, so I can have made a good family planning, reproductive, sexual health decisions, and in my sense of professionalism, of course, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to become a leader, so I invite you to discover further about this campaign in the framework of implementation of youth leadership that we call the Merci Mon Héros campaign through this QR code and this link, and you will be able to discover some detailed information that will allow you to further discover this campaign. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Edson, for this presentation. I think Edson has showed the actions conducted by the youth towards the youth itself in terms of the adoption of family planning and through financial channels through the Merci Mon Euro campaign. Thank you very much, Edson. Now we're going to move to the next presenter. And please be ready with your suggestions, remarks, questions. I'm going to introduce you now, Madame Ventin, who is responsible for the management of knowledge and communication in of international services in Vietnam. She's going to intervene in the implementation of the communication campaign for the change of social behaviors in Vietnam. Her presentation will focus on the programs of youth around reproductive and sexual health. Madame Evan, you have 15 minutes for your presentation. Thank you very much.
Cannot speak French, so bear with me. As Alima has mentioned, my name is Van, and I'm currently the Knowledge Management and Communication Manager at PSI Vietnam. Today, I will be presenting PSI experience to support the establishment and the nurturing of a youth-led network for sexual and reproductive health programming. So the result and the experience that I'm sharing with you today are part of a project called Using Human-Centered Design to Reduce Unintended Pregnancy Among Youth and Adolescents in Vietnam. The project is funded by Maverick Collective, which is an initiative by PSI, which gather female philanthropists who are interested in investing and improving the well-being and the health of girls and young women across the world. Maverick Collective allow platform of PSI to test and try out new approach such as a human-centered design, quite similar to your approach of co-creation with the youth that our colleague just presented earlier. To start my presentation, I want to give you a little bit of background of the SIH situation in Vietnam. As the global adolescent pregnancy rate is declining, the rate of unintended pregnancy among Vietnamese young girls and women remain quite high. In some estimate, at least 10% of the Vietnamese women between 15 and 24 have at least one unintended pregnancy. Most of them are in the urban area. So our project aim is to really understand what is going on, what are the barriers that preventing young girls and women from accessing SRH information, product and service, as well as to design or identify effective solution that can uncover this barrier. So at the empathy or the research phase of the project, we conduct desk review as well as formative research interview with youth in urban of Hanoi. And we learned that although youth are aware of multiple contraceptive methods, most of them are laced with misinformation or myths. For example, IUD can cause infection, condoms sold at pharmacy are counterfeit or low quality. We also learned that youth are not motivated to learn and discuss about SIH until there is a problem. Mainly because one, they don't have frequent sex, so they don't really see the need to really learn about it. And second, because youth reporting that they don't have reliable source of information when it comes to SRHR. Their parents are also avoiding the topic. And when SRH education are provided at school, the information are not interesting or not attracting enough for youth. The youth also tell us that they desire for a place and for a discreet and friendly place where they can learn about SRH as well as to purchase SRH product or service as they need. With all of that, the project sees that there is a limbo, we call it as a limbo that youth in Vietnam are stuck in, where they are sexually active and sexually curious, but they are not sexually empowered to take charge of their own health. With that said, the project go through a co-creation process with the youth. All of the intervention that I've mentioned later are co-design, co-iterate, as well as co-implement by the youth facilitator as well as youth population in our project province. The first intervention is a Facebook online page where the youth facilitator are managing and creating content that are based on credible source of information, but also speaking in their language so that it attracts the interest of the other youth. The second intervention are the guru who are providing online counseling. Guru are expert in the field of OBGYN, psychology who are interested in promoting safe sex. And last but not least are the series of youth-led events that we co-organize with different and multiple youth organizations and youth club in the city. Through that interaction and through those youth-led events, the project were able to engage with youth leaders who demonstrate not only their interest in SRH, but also a great potential for advocating for family planning. With that, we decide that we want to further invest into that network and to see that whether we can create a more sustainable SRH programming model. So what did we do? When we start the process, we start with mapping all of your youth organization and youth club in the city who are working actively in SRH. We quickly learned that not many of them are doing so. Simply or probably because the same reason, the same insight that I have shared earlier. One, they don't have frequent sex, so they don't really see the need for it. Although all of the learning and the information that they learn in such a part in the current passive stage is what they're gonna apply in when they first have sex. So to start the fire or to start the interest in this youth group and organization, the project creates small grant. Each amount for 100 to 100 and I'm sorry, from 1,000 to 1,200 US dollar, which youth can use to design their own SRH event or to try to start thinking about how to link SRH with their current and their existing program at their organization or their club. To be able to receive that funding or that grant, the youth organization and youth club need to go through a screening process in which we ask them to form a team of 3 to 4 to really thinking of and formulate and put down on paper what their ideas is going to be or what the event are going to look like. And we provide them with multiple capacity building workshop. The capacity building workshop not only talk about different contraception method, but we also touch on topics that are closer to youth. For example, freedom of choice, freedom of expression. By doing that, we're making SRH more friendly and more relatable to youth. We also provide coaching where each of the screened and each of the selected group are matched with 2 youth facilitator who are trained by the project to assist them throughout the process. They help bring the organization from writing their proposal, writing the script for the event, actually implementing the event and reflecting what they have done well or not well doing that. Last but not least, to really nurture that interest and to keep the momentum, we try to promote collaboration between different organizations and club. We ask them to talk to each other, discussing what they have done well or not well. We organizing sharing workshop where they share their achievement, celebrate each other as well as to appreciate each other difference. In January of 2020, when we have our first workshop and our first engagement with these youth leaders, we have about 40 of them. By now, the project have engaged with 169 youth leaders, and the event have reached more than 12,000 youth in the city through their online and offline event. Their online content, mainly on Facebook, also have 24.1 million reach. The network has come up with their own name, which is called the Love WED Network. As you can see also from the name, they don't talk about family planning or SRH directly, but through linking love and other more universal value like freedom of choice or freedom of expression. This make family planning or SRH not too intimate to youth and more relatable. So earlier this year, these youth leaders actually sat down together and brainstorm and actually implement and design one of the first SRH event organized by youth in the public space in Hanoi. The event have successfully mobilized 82 organizers and volunteers from different youth clubs and organizations. They have multiple types of events, a talk show on SRH youth leadership, game, consultation corner, partner booth, and exhibition. And the event have attracted 1,716 event participants in person. So where are we now? Where is the sustainable piece that I promised you at the beginning of my presentation? To start, we can see that the youth leaders who have engaged with the project have trained and equipped with multiple and important concept and skill for such as informed choice, event organization, facilitation, which not only help them through their engagement with the project, but we also allow them to further engage with their community and organize other SRH activity in the future. Second part is that from that 169 youth engaged that I told you earlier, we now have a core group of 23 youth who are actively talking and discussing about what they're going to do when the project ends by the end of this year. They have talked about starting a social business where they can have the revenue to reinvest into further youth-led event or youth-led activity, as well as to fundraise for an annual SRH public event to one, continue to normalize that SRH discussion in the public, and two, to demonstrate youth potential as well as youth present in this field of work. We are also working with them and have planned with them to increase their exposure and connect with other partners so that they can maximize their potential as well as to tap into other available resource and opportunity. We actually have one of the youth team members here with me, Namang. So if any of you are interested in partnering with a youth-led network in Vietnam, please come and talk to him. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Ok, merci Madame Van pour sa présentation. Et bon, du peu que j'ai pu comprendre.
Thank you for this. From what I was able to understand, because there was a loss in connection, Madame Havana shared the experience of her youth to the level of her country. We, through the collaboration of different organizations, is going to contribute to impact the youth in the adoption of healthy sexual behaviors. Thank you very much, Madame Van. Write down your questions, please. We're going to move to the next presentation. Ms. Wanda Osoko, who is a Malian feminist. And also in the work Gutu, she's passionate for the leadership participation in the decision making, in political decision making, and reproductive and sexual health programs. She works for the unity of coordination of work Gutu, and she has the run strategy and to present her summary symbolism at the practice and significant engagement together in partnership. You have a partnership for your presentation. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I am Ulrika Misako. I'm going to be presenting in French. As Alima said, I'm going to present an example of significant engagement in a partnership in Ouagadougou, which symbolizes and from symbolism to practice, which is an example of significant engagement. I am the author, well, as authors of the strategy, we have Aissatou Tio, Jeanette Unikarin, Janebu Diallo, and Alison Bondenheimer, who have helped in the elaboration of this. And for me, it would be a pleasure to present the results of our research and the results of this significant engagement of the youth in the Ouagadougou Partnership region. First of all, I'm going to present the think tank for the Ouagadougou Partnership. I don't know if we have people in the room that have heard speak about the think tank, Jen. Well, maybe you have the pleasure to know that we have the youth here who already know this think tank of Ouagadougou, which is a regional reflection and group for the youth that was created in 2016 by the youth and for the youth, with the support of the Ouagadougou Partnership Coordination Unit and also with the implementation partners. So this is an integral part of the Ouagadougou Partnership youth strategy, and it wants to be at the table of decisions because the youth have screamed a lot that they did not want it to be only in the room just to feel it, but they wanted to be together with, next to the decision makers. And in this way, we can also have our voices. And that's why the think tank junk. Um, we're going to say it like this. It's like this that the think tank has been born. Our mission is to survey that our approaches in terms of reproductive and sexual health are adapted to the specific and determined needs for, with, by the youth, ensuring that they have an active participation in reflections, processions, interventions in the field of sexual and reproductive health and family planning. What's our vision? The Jeune think tank is an expertise center grouping young people from a different horizon so they can influence politics concerning the reproductive and sexual health of the youth. And here we have the prioritization of family planning towards the youth as beneficiaries, but above all as change actors. And as I was saying before, the youth say we're not only the future, we are also the present, and we are the future as well. And the future is being prepared today. That's why, as a young, it's important for them to be at the decision-making table, so they can be changing the agents, and so they can come up after the generations, and so they can take the relay of from the older generation. So that's the movement of Ouagadougou, what the movement is doing. Our interventions. What do we do specifically with the Ouagadougou Partnership Jeune think tank? Well, we would like to promote the participation, the active participation of the youth at decision making, as I was saying, and the implementation of interventions linked to the youth in space of Ouagadougou partnerships. Equally, as intervention, we have systems, mentorship systems that support young leaders and associations that have been implemented. I'm going to use a specific example, and we're going to be organizing every year um, an advocacy workshop. So we're going to be having the call to um, candidacies. So we're going to be receiving at least 50. And for the organization of the advocacy race, well, we're going to have here one. We're going to have one organization of the implementation team, and in here we're going to engage the youth, and well, we're going to have mentorship workshops.
research, we have the secretariat, the subcommittee on education, and so on. So we have this advocacy programs, and especially just as I have already explained, we try to do a lot of coaching along the line. Now, methodologies and outcomes or results. Now, what we do today, what are the methodologies that we use? And that especially looking at the outcomes that we have arrived at, looking at mentorship and then training, and especially for this part, because we see that really as a means of reflection, because just as I said, when you look at this methodology of co-creation, which gives value to the various acquisition of competencies, and then especially looking at what I look out for, and then especially this can help us to excel, and then also look at the youth equally in this direction to be able to excel and then be able to provide the necessary advice. So for this all within the region, and then also be able to hit our targets, our goals. And so we have various practical energies and then also practical advice here and there, and especially through the various platforms of communication and so on and so forth, and especially to have maximum information and equally helping to disseminate good practices here and there. In terms of key results, here I'll share with you some key outcomes, and especially with the youth. The youth, champion youth, are actually having a lot of technical knowledge, and in order to help them to promote this technical knowledge, one finds ways of seeing how we would be able to manage all these new technologies of information with the youth. Altogether, the youth organize meetings and then also try to see how such and such sessions are organized. There are sessions, number of sessions, those that define the various products in the sessions, and then also look at the various forms of parallelisms. And then also we have technical and financial partners. We have implementing partners, and who help us to follow the youth's voice. And then this is the way we manage to do the coaching and the mentorship, and especially constituting a special goal, and especially in Ouagadougou. The youth of the region are also having various tools, and which I was talking about the use of social media, and then also based on other topics, and especially to know the content, and with the various social media platforms. And so we have various forms of information that are distributed, because when you look at the area of partnership, we have a lot of youth, and then also we have those who are ready to share information. Then we have a lot of advocacy, especially for the organization of the youth. When I'm talking about advocacy help here and there, we had a lot of youth organizations that came together, and then also looking at those that deal with advocacy competitions here and there, in order to have better trust among themselves. And so when you put the youth in partnership with all the organizations, we try to look at all these organizations and then also build trust amongst them. And then this actually leads to get all kinds of knocking at the doors of various people, and especially for the various forms of organizations. And I would like to also mention and thank in the hall various organizations that have supported us a lot, especially to have success. We have RIS, PSI, MSI, and various organizations that I may have forgotten some that have supported us in organizing our youth. Now, in terms of lessons learned, the key outcomes to train the youth in the management of knowledge and specifically in the creation of content, and then also give them the capacity to summarize useful information and then have access to Facebook and other things and other platforms. Now, we have a strong means of achieving all or reaching all these youth, specifically the youth that take advantage of their technical knowledge in terms of the social media, and then also leading them to be more committed. These priorities for us are very, very essential because we have them, and then also their activism, and to see whether they can be employed on the market. Now, the various think tanks of the partnerships, and then every 2 years, we meet to be able to get the necessary information from them, and then also looking at how they can even do their work well. The act of trying to twin up associations of youth, and especially various elderly organizations, enhances the bilateral um, network, no networking. And so we deal with the facilitation of these groups by bringing them together to even go beyond the implementation of the youth at the center of the various reflections. Now we go beyond that because we look at the youth as an important group, and not necessarily achieving their goals by 2030, but even helping us to involve them, the civil society, the youth, and especially all that come together around the decision-making table, and then also the youth that are really strengthened here and there. And then, so briefly put, this is the presentation I have to make. I thank you. Thank you very much for this brilliant presentation, where she had actually given us the whole reflection. Now, let's look at the participation of the youth, and then also sensitizing the youth to get the various channels of communication rightly done. Now, go to the next presentation, and don't forget, because we will soon move on to another. We have Madame Reda Blair, Kimberly Smith, and Daddy Fundira. These are the main researchers, and with the various information on our population and then also health economics, we look at the areas of health and then also family planning for the decade. Today, she will present the outcomes of a study and in a systematic update of the approaches in education in order to improve upon sexual health. Madam, you have 15 minutes to do your presentation.
Thanks everyone for being here. I'm going to speak in English, although I've appreciated the opportunity to dust off my French today. So I'm going to present on a slightly drier subject, which is the state of the evidence base on peer education approaches, which are related to a lot of the programs that we've been talking about here today. So before diving into the evidence review, I want to just start by making sure that we have a common understanding about what we mean by peer education. So in the context of public health programs or interventions, peer education is typically defined as the teaching or sharing of health information, values, and behaviors by individuals of similar age or status. It can be a program that's delivered by and for people of all ages, but it's generally a program that targets youth, as many of you probably know. And the reason for that is because it's leveraging the fact that youth are very influenced by each other and look to each other as credible sources of information. So peer education is often included as one component of a multi-component program. They continue to be wildly popular approaches, and they're highly featured in donor and government agency strategies. So why are they so popular? Well, as I said before, a big part of that is because everyone knows that youth tend to look to their peers for information, for role modeling, for norm setting. And so these are approaches that tend to leverage that for social good. But one of the other reasons they're very popular is they tend to be considered very low cost, easy to implement, and scalable solutions that can reach hard to reach populations. And again, the reason that they're low cost is often because the peer educators themselves are volunteers, and they're sort of paid in kind through the teaching, the training, the mentoring, the support that they get as being peer educators. So wildly popular, lots of promise, but what do we know about these programs? It's actually a highly controversial subject. These programs have followers and fans, and then they have, and they have they have an audience also that's still looking for evidence that they're effective and looking for guidance on how to implement these programs well to have the effects that they want. So when we went to the literature to try to answer this question on behalf of our partners that we're working closely with, we found it very difficult to answer. There are wildly different views in the literature on the effectiveness of this program, of these program types. In addition, there hasn't been a systematic review of these programs for the last decade. The last global evidence review only captured studies through 2008. So to try to answer these questions for our partners, with the support of the David and Lucille Packard Foundation, we undertook a systematic evidence review that looked at these programs and the evidence of effectiveness. So we looked across the published and gray literature. We looked at studies conducted in English, French, and Spanish, and we tried to capture all studies that had been conducted, even the unpublished studies, again, over the last over a 10-year period, from 2009 to 2019. We found almost 1,300 potential studies, but in the end, there were 76 studies that met our inclusion criteria. In terms of how big a focus the peer education program was, the youth that were targeted, what they measured, et cetera. So our review in the end covered 76 studies and 70 programs. So just very briefly about how we went about this, we used a very systematic, well-established approach to assess the credibility of the studies. And there was a team of 2 researchers who independently reviewed each study and made a rating of whether the study was of high or low quality. We followed a protocol that's used widely across a lot of systematic reviews, including a 10-year study of teen pregnancy prevention programs in the US, which we wanted to build off of and be able to compare results to. So what did we find? Well, first of all, we found, not surprisingly, that most studies have been conducted in sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and the United States, where these programs tend to be a lot more popular. These programs are implemented largely among secondary school students. They're largely school-based with community components. And the most common topics they cover are HIV, STI prevention, family planning, and contraception. Most are multi-component programs. But the biggest result we found in the context of an evidence review is that the overall quality of the evidence right now is low. Only 15 of the 76 studies were rated as credible, and these were not ivory tower thresholds for credibility. They were fairly straightforward, I think very reasonable criteria, which doesn't mean that the other studies are not producing results. That could be true. It's that the methodologies they used led us to question whether, in fact, the program participants were just different from other youth that they were being compared to. So was it the program or just the youth that tend to participate in these programs that are just different naturally? So that's one of the big causes of the bias that we saw in the results. But there are a number of other issues with the studies. So in general, the quality of the evidence is low, but the quality varied a lot across regions. The US had the highest quality studies overall, but less than a third of those studies were deemed credible as well. Okay, how do I get this to go to the next slide? So the other result we found is that the non-credible studies tend to tell a different story than the credible studies. The non-credible studies tend to be very positive about peer education programs, saying that they have positive effects on knowledge, attitudes, self-efficacy, a range of behaviors, from accessing health services to using contraception to a number of correlates of those behaviors. In contrast, the credible evidence is less positive. It shows that there are short-term impacts on knowledge and attitudes, but in general, the harder to change outcomes have little evidence of effectiveness. And there's, again, a number of reasons for this. But the bottom line is that the reason that the literature is so hard to navigate right now is that depending on the study and the study design, they're telling fairly different stories. I will say another disappointing finding in the literature is that of all of these studies, there were only 8 studies that looked at outcomes on peer educators themselves, and only one of them was credible. So there's a lot of anecdotal evidence to suggest that these can be considered youth development, youth leadership programs. But again, there's not a lot of evidence on this. And I think the evidence, just as a side note, I think the reason why the evidence base is so important is because a lot of funders and implementers are looking for evidence to decide whether to invest and how in these programs and how to design and implement them correctly. So we did also look at the evidence out there to try to identify what makes effective programs effective. And we boiled it down to 5 things, some of which I've mentioned before. We also did an implementation learning study that I'm not presenting here that goes into this in a little bit more depth. But basically, peer education programs tend to be, or approaches tend to be much more effective when they're housed in multifaceted, multi-component programs that really take into account the reality of youth decision-making and agency and action. And adopt what in the public health literature is called the information, motivation, behavior approach. So you have information dissemination through one-on-one sessions and group sessions. You also have counseling or psychotherapy that really builds motivation for positive decision-making and action. And then you have behavioral skills training, from how to put on a condom to how to go access health services. So really, really taking into account the many factors that affect how youth make decisions and their behaviors. Similarly, peer education programs are effective when there's a high degree of adult involvement to train, to support, to mentor peer educators. And usually the best programs sort of really take into account what is the comparative advantage of youth in these programs versus adults Where do adults provide credibility that backs up what youth are saying? What can they do that youth don't do? And how can they motivate peer educators to be as effective as they can be in the context of these programs? So third, all effective programs had formal linkages with health centers and providers. So that if youth decided they did want to, use contraception, they knew how to get it, they knew where to go. There were easy referral mechanisms or pathways to that. I mean, this is probably common sense, but it's amazing how many peer education programs are light touch in terms of the training, in terms of the exposure to the program. But all effective programs had dozens of hours of training and long exposure time. It doesn't happen overnight. There's lots of factors affecting how youth digest and act on the information and skills they receive. And so the fifth one is a little bit of an aspirational element, which is that, and this comes from what implementers said to us as well in the other study, which is the best peer education approaches involve youth in how the program is designed, and they provide youth not only the support and mentoring they need, but the freedom to do their jobs. So this doesn't mean that they can go sort of off script in the messages necessarily, but they can figure out how to deliver them to the youth that they're speaking to in ways that youth are going to understand and be compelled by the information. So what are the key takeaways? Well, the jury's still out from an evidence perspective on peer education. There's few good studies and there are few good examples of effectiveness. So this is important again because funders and implementers look at the evidence to decide whether and how to support programs. The second thing that needs to be addressed is that implementation tends to be subpar. People look at these approaches as low cost, easy to implement, and they're not. They're hard to get right for a number of factors. And so there are a lot of reasons to continue to invest in peer education approaches. They're critical from a rights-based youth empowerment perspective. They're essential for norm setting because they're how youth determine what and how to do things. And they're also a promising approach for youth leadership. But first, we have to refrain from having, peer education alone programs where peers or youth are just sort of providing information in a vacuum. There's a lot of evidence that suggests those do not work. And it's really important for funders and implementers and organizations to insist on best practices that are out there. There is learning out there. And next, it is important to build the evidence base. If these are effective programs, we should be sharing that, and so that they're funded more and implemented better. This doesn't mean evaluate everything. It means take a thoughtful approach to doing these programs from the design to the implementation phase, do formative studies, document how to do them right, and why they're working, and then do an evaluation of them that you can share out that supports replication and scale up of these programs in a way that they'll have the effects that they intend to have. So, thank you very much for listening. Happy to answer any questions.
Ok, merci beaucoup, madame. Nous retenons donc de son étude.
Very much, madam. So we look at peer education and then also how efficient it is and also how well it is done. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now waiting for you for questions, additions, and comments. I hope the translation is done. We now are at the stage of questions. And so if you have any questions, please raise your hand and then we shall receive your question. And then the answers will be provided by the panelists. Yes, madam, you have the floor. Can the speaker be given a mic so that the interpreter can follow? Unfortunately, the interpreter is not following the question being asked. Thank you very much.
là, vous m'entendez mieux? D'accord. Et Mariam Lidjani, responsable de programme.
You hear me well? I'm the program director, and I have been interested in these presentations. I would like to know that what you have had to do in facing problems with the implementations, and then especially looking at the intergenerational dialogue, and then also see how necessarily we can work with the youth. It's not only a matter of pieces of advice for the youth, but then also we look at how you were able to mitigate various forms of problems as you did your work.
For the evidence that you had in Africa, can you give us some pointers on the studies that showed which worked, what type of studies worked, or what type of activities worked for youth, and that made them really aware of what's going on in terms of SRH? Thank you very much.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Abdoulaïka, Soltis.
Good morning, my name is Abdoulaïka.
Merci beaucoup.
First of all, I thank you
Toutes ces personnes qui
and all these presenters and those who have attended. Thank you for all your presentations that will help us to position ourselves on a certain number of questions. And so especially for the first presentation concerning the panel, if I understood very well, this world of a hero, the hero, thank you very much. The reflection that suggests is that at a given time we can ask the question, can I transpose this? That is the profile. You had already looked at the profile of people and so on. Has there been any reflection on these issues to see how to commit various activities or actions to even not necessarily go through a direct parent, to see how to commit parents on this process at the same time as the heroes to deal with this question for the children or the youth. The other question is based on the partnership with Ouagadougou. We saw a lot of advocacy activities that were committed. Now, today, have we had, because if I am not mistaken, is with regard to decisions that are to be taken, has there been something that has been achieved in terms of decision making, and what has that provided today for these partnerships in Ouagadougou? Thank you very much. Any more questions in the hall?
Hi, my name is Julia from Women's Liver, and I have a question around the research. You mentioned, I saw on the list of what made a credible resource or not, or study, was also randomized control trials, RCTs, which we know a lot of community-based organizations and youth-led organizations, don't have the resources to conduct. So what guidance do you have for those kinds of organizations to generate still effective evidence that can show their programs are working, or that they can really learn from, what's not working in the programs to, improve, but also for future funding? Thank you.
Il y a d'autres questions dans la salle? Another question? Okay.
More questions in the hall? Thank you very much. I want to thank all the presenters, and then also at the same time I have a question to address. That is, thank you, my hero, and especially just to know how they continue to work on the necessary campaigns. And I know that at the basis, and more, we learned that this could interest the various activities. That is in terms of the implementation, sensitization with parents. And I would like to understand what has actually prevailed in that, and what are the results that the movement from digital and all that has to deal with digital activity to field action has provided as outcomes. And then also, has a campaign been seen? Because one could say that in this model, we need a kind of digital campaign to move on. Thank you. Do you have any more questions to ask?
Nous allons passer la parole aux intervenants.
We now
pour
give the
répondre aux
floor to the
différentes
speakers to
questions.
respond to the
La
various
première question
questions.
s'adressait à Edson.
The first question is addressed to Edson.
Hello. Ok, merci à tous les,
Thank you
les intervenants
to all the
pour
speakers
pouvoir mieux comprendre
and
cette
to
approche qui
better
est Merci
understand
mon héros.
this approach.
La première
The
question
title, Thank You,
était de
My
savoir
Hero.
quelles sont les
The
barrières,
first question is to know what are the
quelles
barriers
sont les difficultés que
and
nous
what are
avons
the
rencontrées dans la
difficulties
mise en œuvre de
that we
cette
had
campagne.
in the
Alors,
implementation of this campaign.
je peux dire
Now,
que
I can say
d'abord,
that first of all,
comme je l'avais dit à
just
l'entame
as
de
I
ma
said
présentation,
at the beginning of my
les
presentation,
normes sociales
the social norms
conservatrices
are very
forment la première barrière.
conservative,
Alors c'est ce
and
constat
that
même
it
qui
is
nous a
this
amené à
observation that
trouver des
led
voies
us
et moyens pour
to
pouvoir
find ways and
réduire
means
l'impact de
to
ces
be able to reduce the
barrières.
impact of this
Maintenant, dans la
barrier.
mise en œuvre
Now, in
même
the
de notre
implementation
campagne,
process,
c'est vrai que ces
it is
barrières
true
ont
that
toujours,
this
ces
barrier
normes sociales ont
is
toujours
still
eu,
posing a problem. But
leur
then,
impact.
when you look at
Et
it,
ces difficultés ont
you
été
look at
notamment
this
d'abord
difficulty that
l'engagement
has
de la
been
jeune fille.
the
Si nous
commitment
prenons par
of
exemple la
the
campagne
young
du côté
girl.
digital,
And
nous
then when
voyons
you
que
look
nous
at
avons
the
plus de
digital
l'engagement
campaign, we have more
masculin que féminin. D'abord, ça a été un
male
défi
commitment
auquel la
than
campagne
the
a été
female
confrontée.
commitment.
Et pour pallier à
And then
cela,
also
nous
to be
avons
able
plus
to resolve
orienté les
that,
contenus
we had to
vers
orient or guide
les
the
sujets
content
qui attirent
towards
plus,
topics
qui
that
intéressent
attract
plus la gente féminine.
the
Pour pouvoir les attirer à
females
pouvoir
the
interagir.
more,
Donc,
to be able to
on s'intéresse
interact.
plus
So one gets
au côté féminin sur
to
les
the
approches qui pourraient approcher
women's
les
side
gens
in terms of the approaches
pour
to
pouvoir
use
leur
in order
permettre de
to
pouvoir
enable them
interagir sur
to
nos
interact
plateformes et
on
même
our
dans les émissions
platforms
télé et
and
radio.
even in
Nous
the
faisons plus,
television and radio
faisons plus
programs.
l'apparition
And so we look
des
at
jeunes
gender
filles
parity,
pour que
especially
leur
with regards
intervention
to
puisse
the young
interpeller
ones,
les
the
autres
young
jeunes
girls,
filles à
so
pouvoir
that
prendre
their
conscience
interaction can
de la
help
situation et
to
pouvoir
counteract
prendre des actions
our situation
pour
and then
sortir
also
de
be
des
able to
situations.
come out
Nous avons également eu
from the
des
problems.
difficultés
We
sur
equally
le
had
terrain.
difficulties on the
Nous
ground.
avons également eu des
We equally
difficultés
had
sur le
difficulties
terrain
on the
dans les
ground
communautés,
in the
liées
communities,
notamment
linked mainly with
aux normes
the
conservatrices.
various
Dans les institutions
conservative
communautaires,
standards.
nous avons
So in
constaté
the
une certaine
community
réticence
aspects, we saw
des
some kind of
personnes adultes
reticence
à pouvoir
with
se
the
mettre ensemble
adults
avec les jeunes parce que
and
c'est
who
pas
are not able
souvent dans leurs
to manage
habitudes.
with the youth.
Alors, là, nous avons pu
And
créer
there we were
un
able
moyen
to
de
establish
les
a
intéresser.
means of
C'est ce que nous
interesting them.
appelons l'outil en pathways.
That
C'est des
is
cartes
pathways tools.
que nous avons
And then
introduites dans les
this we
communautés.
try to
Et ces cartes
introduce in the communities.
comportent des sujets
And then these
qui
include various
interpellent les
topics
jeunes et
that
les
call on the
adultes
youth and
sur leurs
adults
besoins,
on their
qui
needs,
ouvrent les yeux aux
and
parents,
also
aux
which
adultes de savoir
actually
que
covers
réellement,
the
nous
eyes
avons
of the
besoin de cette
youth.
discussion-là pour
So we
pouvoir
need such
orienter les
discussions
jeunes.
to
C'est
be
pas
able to
pour
guide the youth. And then, if
excusez-moi le terme, les
possible,
gâter, mais c'est
not
pour
to spoil
pouvoir
them,
les orienter comme
but
il
then
se
just to
Ok.
orient or guide them.
Merci beaucoup, Edson. Je
Thank you
pense
very
que
much, Edson.
la
I
discussion
think
pourra se
the
poursuivre
discussion can
après la
continue
session.
after
Nous
the
allons
session.
passer la parole
So we now give the floor to
la deuxième question.
the
Je pense
second
que c'était
topic
adressé à Uri concernant le partenariat de
with
Ouagadougou.
regard to partnerships in Ouagadougou.
Vas-y, Uri.
Yes, go on.
Concernant les résultats de nos
With
plaidoyers,
regard to the results of the
intentions
advocacy,
du partenariat de
and
Ouagadougou,
especially the
j'aimerais pouvoir
purposes
dire
of
que
partnerships in
si
Ouagadougou,
nous
I
prenons
can
de
say
2016 à
that if we
aujourd'hui,
take from
je pense que les
2016 till
résultats sont
today,
déjà flagrants.
then we
La
have
place que
very
les
clear
jeunes
results
en
already.
2016
So
et la
already
place que
in
les jeunes
2016,
occupent aujourd'hui,
you look at the youth
on va voir
position
qu'il y a
today,
déjà une très
and then
énorme
also
différence.
you look at
Et
it
en
with a
2016,
light
les
difference
jeunes
as at
étaient
today.
beaucoup là
And then also, just as the youth were saying, it's not a matter of just filling the classrooms. But then from 2020 to 2022, we don't feel these items in the classes or in the halls. They are only there for decision making. And then when we take the international conference on the family planning, we had all kinds of partnerships in Ouagadougou that came up in the course of the opening ceremony. And I think here is a very concrete example. So, with regard to that, we do various activities that the youth understand the use of the partnership of Ouagadougou. And then also, we look at giving them a place even in the opening ceremony. And we have a lot of examples of the youth. And also to look at the partnership regions. So talking about our results today, we had a lot of efforts, and then the tone has already been provided. And then also we look at this commitment of the youth, and then also to ensure that the youth are better equipped. Thank you. Thank you. We give the floor to Mrs. Kim.
Try to answer these questions rapid fire, although they're kind of big questions. So what are the key elements of programs that work in Africa? Interestingly, the elements are common across, I can tell you things that make programs in Africa not work that are different. But the things that make them work, so there are 6 programs with evidence of effectiveness. It's about the training and the right training, using the right curriculum and messages. Don't adopt something from the US and just implement it, but actually really tailor it, use youth to tailor it. It's about the duration of the programs, and of the training, of the exposure, like I said. In Africa, many of these programs are multi-component programs. Some might say, some of them are almost what you would call like kitchen sink approaches. There's so many different elements of these programs, and the peer education component gets very diluted, particularly in the African context. So it's almost like you have a vacuum of a peer education component that's not linked to the other aspects of the program. But in terms of what works, it's very similar. The right youth that are well-trained and mentored and supported and have the incentives and are doing it for a long enough time that they're really making a difference. In many African contexts, it's also about integrating sort of livelihoods components for out-of-school youth and making sure that the messages are really relevant to how they live their lives and what they can and can't do given their situations. So, but generally it's very consistent across geographies. I can also point you or send you, if I get your information, the other brief that goes into this in a little bit more detail. On the evaluation side, a couple of quick responses. So interestingly, randomized control standards trials considered gold standard. In our review, about a third of them were deemed incredible, because youth that were assigned to the treatment group ended up in the control group. They lost half of the sample members. So those can be difficult to implement too. If implemented well, they can actually be relatively low cost though. So that's sort of a misconception, I think. But it's about designing them well. It's about following the youth for a long enough period. It's about measuring the right outcomes. It's making sure that youth outcomes change over time as youth age anyway. So you need to have a comparison group, right? So it's not just they're getting older, they're learning more, right? So I don't know how to answer that question in like 30 seconds exactly, but those are some of the elements.
Okay.
Can I just have one reflection? I totally agree with you in the insight that there is no one perfect solution for our problem. And that's why all of the programs have the multiple intervention approach. It is just hard when you try to evaluate the effectiveness of one component of the overall program. But then again, I also agree that as well as my other presenter today have talked about youth co-creation and youth participate not only to provide information at the design step, but also implement the program will be the way to do peer education differently.
Ok, merci. Je pense que les autres questions trouveront leur réponse on
I
offre
think the
après
other
la
questions will
session.
find
Donc,
the
Edson, je
answers
pense que tu as une question à laquelle je
after
peux
the
leur
session.
répondre, mais
So
étant donné que le temps est avancé, on va répondre après dehors. Les discussions peuvent
after the
continuer après la
discussions,
session.
discussions
Donc,
can
merci à
continue after the
tous
session.
d'être
So we
venus à
thank
notre
you all for
session.
coming,
Ce qu'il faut retenir, c'est que les jeunes jouent un rôle très
and
important
especially
dans
the
la mise
youth
en œuvre des programmes de
who
planification
allow
familiale.
family
Et
planning
c'est très
programs.
important de leur accorder cette place-là. Merci beaucoup et
Thank
bonne
you
suite
very
de
much,
journée.
and then also wish you a nice continuation.